Hey, creepy. What do you know about the Archangel's taiga? I bet the first things that come to mind are swamps, cranberries, and Lomonosov with its fish drain. Well, I've got a couple of amazing stories to share that came to mind recently while I was clearing out old papers. I have this odd habit of saving everything, from letters to tax receipts, like an archive with no real purpose. Thankfully, I don't have much work to do these days, so I can write them down in a way that is somewhat readable. I was going through old letters from my aunt, who lives in a village in the Archangelsk region. I've been there since I was a kid, and the last time I visited was 3 years ago. I want to help her move, but that did not happen, so I ended up doing some farming, fixing village equipment. Damn, electric came to the village, and drinking with the locals. The men there were mostly the types who would be found wandering the next world with a lantern. But they traded their homemade moonshine for an appreciative ear to tell their village stories. One of the most memorable was Grandfather Luchak, or Nikolai Luchek, who, despite being past retirement age and fond of alcohol, had a sharp mind and a fantastic memory. You had to get past his initial appearance though. He looked like a faded cop from the movie Cargo 200, a real character. Grandfather Luchak was born in such a remote part of Arkhangelsk that there was not even any electricity, a village council, or a church. These modern conveniences were usually in villages closer to the center of the settlement, the largest village in the area. Most villages there are along local rivers, which are countless in the region. As you moved away from the river and deeper into the forest, the villages became smaller, the roads worse, and the people more reclusive and unfriendly. Luchak came from one of these forest villages, Nizhnya Vodanga. You won't find this village, or hundreds of others like it, in official documents. Census takers were thrown off by the abundance of local place names and the fact that there could be 5 or 7 villages with the same name within a 100-mile radius, so they listed everything under new names like Filomonovskaya Rural Settlement. The locals, however, still used the old names to refer to their villages, which made life even more confusing for government officials. Grandfather Luchak loved talking about his hometown. His hometown has always been by a river, but over the years, the river became shallow and swampy. Now, the locals focus on logging, picking berries and mushrooms, and extracting peat. A couple of times a year, carts would arrive, bringing news, buying what they had gathered, and selling salt, matches, and other essentials. Nothing out of the ordinary, but when I asked about Upper Vodanga, since logically there should be one, since he lived in Lower Vodanga, Luchak told me a story I want to share. Upper Vodanga was once home to a group during the Tsarist era. The local Bob Fool would venture into the swamps to gather moss to insulate his hut for the winter, but one time he returned with bad moss. According to Luchak, it looked like regular swamp moss, except it had a bluish tint and smelled like freshly cut hay. When they found it in small patches, they would collect it, dry it, and trade it with the Nenets and Komi people. But if they came across a clearing of bad moss, they marked it from a distance, 100 paces away, and never went closer. The moss did not spread widely, so people could easily navigate the swamps using the marks left by their ancestors. If you didn't, you would get lost in those clearings. As Luchak told it, once an animal, livestock, or an unsuspecting person entered the patch, it released spores or gas that caused paralysis. So, the old man used bad moss to insulate his hut for the winter. The following summer, the villagers realized that even though they had recognized the danger, they did not have time to burn the hut down. Or maybe they couldn't. Or, as it seems to be now, they did not want to. The people from Upper Vodanga, who'd heard the story from the transport workers, had to take action. When they went to the neighboring village, all they found were log houses covered in moss and a thick, heavy smell of hay, even though the grass had only just started to grow. The men were heartbroken, and they burned everything they could find, leaving nothing behind but the ruins of a dozen or so courtyards, all encircled by a ring of dead wood and a dug trench. All that remains is a circle of ash and the name. The authorities were never really concerned about the affairs of the locals, and the villagers themselves just saw it as a harsh reality. They dug up the road leading to Upper Voidanga, avoided walking in that direction, and kept their cattle away from that side. Things might have carried on like that, if not for one incident in the more familiar 20th century, one that Luchak witnessed himself. In the early post-war years, transport workers brought free geologists to the area for the summer. Or maybe not geologists, but people studying the land for potential peat bog development. I will just call them geologists for convenience. The villagers accepted them and settled them with Luka, Father Luchak. The geologists went into the swamps the very next day, refusing a guide, apparently out of fear. You can understand that. The locals, as they were known to say, were not particularly welcoming. The villagers warned them not to go near Upper Voidanga if they wanted to come back alive. They explained in detail what had happened to the village as best as they could, but it was all in vain. The geologists thought that the locals were hiding something from them, something they did not want the Soviet authorities to know about. So, they packed up their bags and tools and headed straight for the ashes. The locals did not try to stop them. I mean, how could they? On the third day, one of the geologists was found on the edge of the village. They'd been looking for a pig that had escaped and made its way to the edge of the forest, but instead, they found him. He was torn up by branches, covered in the grey fur of that same bad moss, and blind. He had been stumbling through the swamp for 2 days. The men called for help, and Luchak, just a 10-year-old boy at the time, joined them. And now, nearly 70 years later, Luchak told how his father, Luka, had washed the moss off the crippled geologist with kerosene, taken from the village, of course. The women were ordered to heat the bathhouse and rake out the coals to lay the poor fellow down. Meanwhile, the men, armed with kerosene, stakes, and ropes, set out to rescue the other 2 geologists. They reached the overgrown site of the ashes after half a day's journey. The first thing they noticed was the smell of hay, and soon after, they saw a grey-blue carpet within a ring of dry grass. There were no trees, no bushes. Luchak vividly described the moss clearing, depressingly calm and flat, except for 2 moss-covered hummocks, or what looked like tree trunks broken in half. The smaller of the 2 hummocks, or stumps, was about a half a fathom high and swayed slightly. It was this one they pulled out with a rope. They weren't wrong. It was one of the missing geologists. What they found was exactly what the geologists had been trying to hide. The man was still alive, wheezing through the moss that had clung to his body, even under his clothes. They dragged him away from the clearing and tried to clear his face. The tiny roots of the moss had to be carefully pulled from his pale, softened skin. Once the moss was cleared from his mouth, his wheezing became a little more understandable. The geologist managed to speak, though faintly. God is in the swamp. God's light is there. Let me go to God. Then, suddenly, he tried to get up, fell face first, and began crawling, but calmed down before the men could snap out of their shock. They ended up burning him on fallen trees, just as they had done centuries earlier to the remains in the same grey clearing. The surviving geologist lived, though he lost his eyesight. Luka, using a saw, had to amputate one of his legs after moss had gotten inside his boot and severely infected the flesh. A month later, an all-terrain vehicle arrived to pick up the geologists. The authorities were told what had happened, and the group was escorted to the scene. A month after that, soldiers arrived in trucks. The soldiers stayed behind, while the trucks took the entire population of Upper Voidanga first to the Pletse, where the Cosmodrome is now located, then resettled them throughout the southern part of the region, with strict orders not to tell anyone what had occurred. That is how Luchak and his father ended up in the village with their aunt. Luka worked first at a 7-year school, then in the timber industry, before retiring to make moonshine and tell incredible stories. Such nonsense, huh, Anon? Maybe my grandfather was a bit of a character, but the story itself was not bad. If I remember anything else, I will write it down. Have you ever heard of para, Kay? I'm a biologist. My job is to study the natural history, ecology, of a few small animals that dwell in the forest floor and some savannas, but that is not important. I am a military and bushcrafting enthusiast. Far from a touristic place, I've been to secluded parts of the Brazilian para, and I have seen a few things. Here is my story. 2009. Joint expedition of my city college and Federal University of Para. Aim is to collect frogs, snakes, turtles, and shit. Embassy tells us Para was notorious for human trafficking and had an absurd rate of homicides. I applied for a CCW, although in Brazil, you can only carry .12, .22, or .380. Bring a Taurus Millennium and backup mag. We land at Belém, team up with other researchers, and head for Belterra to do standard collecting on the Amazon forest. 2 weeks pass by. We head for a mapa, on a place of a hard name, if I recall correctly, to Mukamaki. I don't feel like writing the rest. Too much backstory for a small event. Either way, we went to a mapa, got close to the Suriname border, and shit starts to go south. 7 p.m. Dark as fuck. Get on our boots and head for a stream to collect frogs. It's a small stream. Water is around my waist. Nature is simply amazing at that place. We can hear and see several crickets, frogs, and turtles during our stay. Well, when we are coming out of the stream, I found a small bushmaster and decided to take a few pictures. I'm handling it with a stick, and I see that there is a clearing nearby, so I decide to go there to take a few pictures and whatnot. My fellow researchers follow me. When we get to the clearing, I realize that we are sitting on someone's lawn. I see an abandoned structure. Now, we walk several miles into the border. I'm quite afraid of already being in Suriname and getting arrested because of my gun. I take my waterproof boots off, put on my ankle holster with the PT on it, and an all-star on. I place a flashlight to get a better look at the structure. Well, it's clearly homemade and fucked up. I knock on what should be a door, but it's actually a thin sheet of metal with a few rocks holding it in place. No response. Our team coordinator goes for his turn, beating on the door, and after almost 10 minutes, it becomes clear to us that there was no one in it. We go in. It's covered in fluids, blood and vomit probably. Little to no furniture. Coordinator says something along the lines of, "Yo mano, this is no good." Tells us to get the fuck out. Place PT on chest holder. Waterproof boots were already drenched in water from walking inside a goddamn river, so I say fuck it and walk on my shoes inside the river, and then I realize it's fucking dead quiet. No frogs, crickets whatsoever. We all stop and turn our flashlights off. Nothing. Coordinator turns his flashlight on and tells me to keep going. We get out of the stream. No events or anything. Start walking to our car. Get in car. Take off my wet clothes and start driving on a state road, pretty fucked up. Without warning, there is a police car stopped, blocking our way. Promptly, a Brazilian policeman with a rifle pointed at the car demands for us to get out of the vehicle. We all get out with our hands up. He tells us to get on the ground, spread our legs with the hands behind our head. He starts strip searching us, while another vehicle pulls by and several other policemen get out. He finds my PT Millennium, because it was like in my chest. Starts screaming at me, telling me I'll go to jail for illegally carrying. I tell him where my documents are. He gets it, does not say anything. Then things get strange. There is this black car with PF written in gold letters, where 2 men in a full mob/NBC gear get out. One has a G36C slung across his back. I can only assume they're some branch of Brazilian police, because we were asked to follow them. We were taken to a police station, interrogated, and then released. I still have a lawsuit to get my Millennium back. That's it. No walk the dinosaur, nothing. Pretty strange. Don't know how the two events relate to each other, but I remember thinking, this is no good, when the man in black with a gas mask, glove, and boots came out of the car. Not anything too crazy, and probably not paranormal, but something interesting that happened to me to keep the thread alive. Be me, SPC on Brigade Staff duty. Now, our brigade building was one of the newest on post, maybe 5-ish years old. The place is creepy as fuck though, when there is no one there. All of us Joes would talk about the creepy shit that happened on SD. Some of the junior NCOs that came up through the unit would join in sometimes too. Mostly about the elevator opening and closing in the middle of the night or moving between floors by itself. I saw it happen a few times myself. The place was just creepy. Saturday evening. Go through and help NCO do the building checks. Basically, just going through and checking that all the doors were locked, SI secured, all that jazz. Everything normal in 5. Around 1900, Major hates his family comes in to do some sort of bullshit officer work. I escort him to his office, unlock the door for him, then go back to the desk. About an hour later, Major hates his family comes out, lets the NCO know he's leaving and to lock his office again. Asks if we had done our checks already. Yes sir, we finished about half an hour before you came in. Tells NCO to check the office beside his again. He heard some weird noises coming from it. Roger sir, I'll check it again. Major hates his family, leaves. SBC anon, go check that office. Walk towards the office, keys in hand. Lights dimmed, and the sound of my footsteps echoes in the hallway. Get to the Major's office, and hear what sounds like a busy tone coming from a phone. Open the door. Everything is fine. Still hear the noise though. Check the Major's phone, sitting in its cradle snugly. Close the door and lock it. Still hear the noise. Open the office next door. The handset for the phone was dangling off the side of the desk by its cord, like someone picked it up and dropped it. Definitely the cause of the busy tone. Place the handset back in its cradle. Turn off the light. Lock the door, and speed walk back to the desk. Tell the NCO what happened. Laughs it off. That kind of thing happens in this building all the time, SPC and on. Go back to reading a book or whatever. Try to forget about it. 0200 rolls around. NCO starts another round of checks. Halfway through, the NCO calls for me. Walk down the hallway. Sees he's in the same office as before. Walk into the office to see the phone is dangling off the desk again. Busy tone going off again. I told you, shit like this happens all the time. NCO picks up the handset and puts it back. Closes up the door, locks it, and continues his checks. I go back to the desk and back to trying not to fall asleep. That's all that happened that night, and the most paranormal thing I experienced in that building. Maybe the second time was just an NCO fucking with me. I have no way of knowing. Still, there were too many places where the building just felt unsettling for me to be completely by myself again. This shit happened to me about a year ago, around this time in the wilderness, to the north of Mount Thielsen in Oregon. I guess I don't really care if y'all believe me or not. I just want to know what you think. Day 1. Out for a camping trip with my good buddy Travis. Plan to spend a 3-day weekend bushwhacking and shooting and bullshitting. Start at the Pacific Crest Trail, off Highway 148, and then head off trail for about 2 miles, at the base of the mountain. First day was awesome, just drinking and not really much shooting because we wanted to get at least 5 more miles off the trail so we wouldn't scare any of those hippie PCT hikers. Get really drunk by the end of the night and end up cowboy camping because we could not be bothered to set up our tents and the sky was clear. I remember waking up in the night once, not sure why but still being drunk, I promptly resumed my slumber. Day 2. Waking up I had a mean headache and went down to the creek that we camped near to get some water. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and put my Beretta PX4 in my holster. Travis was already out, and I assumed he would also be at the creek. When you sleep outside with no tent, you tend to wake up at sunrise, even if you are hungover. Heading down to the creek, I'm hearing a lot of splashing. Oh shit, I'm thinking, I hope I don't catch Travis taking a fucking bath. I walk up to the cut bank and see below me about 15 feet in the water is a black tall deer, thrashing, caught against a log jam. It was a little doe. probably only a year and a half old at most. Something looked wrong about it, but I could not see it very well because its thrashing was making the water real turbulent. There is a significant amount of blood in the water, and I can see it flowing downstream. The tracks were kind of triangular, with one claw coming off the front, and the spacing between was really big, like 8 to 9 feet. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, we were pretty fucking spooked. We went back to our camp and got all our gear on and endeavored to get somewhere the fuck else. We decided to head up the mountain, get a good view, and get to a place that wasn't so densely forested. Getting up near the tree line, it starts to get real rocky and hard to cross, so we just keep hiking around the rim of the tree line for the remainder of the day. We set up camp today early and shoot shit, and generally goof off, trying to shake off that shit and not ruin our weekend. I'm setting up some paper targets in our range, and all of a sudden, I start to hear this really loud, high-pitched noise that was like ringing in my ears, but I knew it wasn't in my ears because I could hear it reverberating in the forest. I look back at Travis, who is about 25 meters away, and he is looking off to the left with his AR leveled at something. He looks scared. Just as sudden as it started, the ringing stops. Right as it stops, and every tree around us takes off, like at least 100 birds, I run back to him. As I'm running, I trip over a loose rock and fall face first, AR in hand. Scraped up my AR pretty bad, but that's just some unrelated shittiness. I get up and keep running at him. When I reach him, he still has his AR leveled and is scanning downhill into the forest. What the fuck was that? He does not say anything, he is just breathing real hard, and I can see the sweat on his face. Travis, I saw something down there, he says. His voice is shaky. What did you say? Took about 5 minutes before he would calm down enough to lower his weapon and speak to me normally. First thing he says is, "We are leaving, right now." Okay, I can do that. We pack everything up and start heading back down towards the highway. At this point, it's about 6 p.m., which means we will be hiking into the night. I point this out, but he does not even seem to care, so off we go. As we are walking, he describes what he saw to me. He said it was jet black, and tall enough to reach the first branches of the trees, which means it was about 20 feet tall. He noticed it, right as the ringing sound started, and when he looked right at it, it jumped straight up into the canopy. He said it jumped, probably 30 to 40 feet, straight up. I'm not one for paranormal conspiracy shit, but I was not about to debate him after what had happened that day. At about 11 p.m., we are still hiking, and it is dark as fuck, and a thunderstorm had started around the mountaintop. I don't know if you've been out in that real dark, so dark that you can't even see your feet, but that is what it was. The sky was thick with thunderclouds, and the air was heavy. I'm so tired. Travis is not tired. He has the look of a man possessed about him. We reach the trail, and I breathe a sigh of relief. Some semblance of human society, like a trail, brings a surprising amount of assurance. At this point, I get cell service back, and call my wife to come pick us up in an hour when we get to the trailhead. She is pissed, but says okay. Suddenly, the ringing starts again. It's louder this time. We both start running like hell. Ahead of us on the trail, a bunch of treetops start swaying back and forth. Travis stops dead and mag dumps into the treetops. He is shooting wildly, and it scares the fuck out of me. The ringing stops after he mag dumps. We stand still for a second, and it is dead silent. Then a clap of thunder goes off behind us, and we bolt. I swear, there must have been lightning not 50 feet away, but we did not see a flash or anything. We get to the trailhead about 20 minutes later. My wife pulls up a little after that, and we get the fuck out of there. Never been back to those woods. Don't want to. Be in a woods with GF and a few of her friends at this cabin that her grandparents owned. Only male on this entire trip. Sad as hell. Have to listen to women talk about things that I don't really understand. Remember GF's grandpa kept a small trove of vintage guns in the cabin. Spend time by myself, shooting at trees, or using empty beer bottles as target practice. Fuck yeah, time of my life. None of the girls like the fact that there is guns, but I don't really give a fuck. Spend one night on the front porch, cleaning one of GF's grandpa's guns by porchlight. Not because I wanted to, but because her fucking normie-ass friends keep bitching about how unsafe they feel being around guns. Finish putting a nice old rifle back together when I hear some rustling in the woods. Look up, thinking nothing of it. Start looking at the tree line. Fairly dark out, but I can still make out a figure. Motherfucker is a good 6'8" to 6'9", covered in some hefty dark fur. Some bright orange eye shine that I can see clearly. I don't know if it's sizing me up or me just being paranoid. Comes out a little more. Big gorilla-like son of a bitch, at least in the face. I am ready to shoot the fucker if he or it tries anything, but it merely stares at me for a moment. I am shaking internally, scared out of my ass. Thing finally fucks off and continues to go in the direction it was heading off to. It was July 1997, deep in the taiga, near the border of the Irkutsk and Yakutsk regions. A team of 10 worked tirelessly on logging operations. Ivan, a 30-year-old man, was among them. He was a straightforward, kind-hearted person who steered clear of alcohol and dismissed any talk of supernatural. Yet, what he encountered that day was not supernatural. It was something far more chilling. Under the midday sun, the crew worked in full swing, felling tree after tree. One trunk crashed into a dense thicket, revealing a horrifying sight when they went to move it. A pit filled with upright corpses of men dressed in prison uniforms. The memory still haunts him to this day. The bodies had not decomposed, he recounted. There wasn't even a smell because of the permafrost. Their faces were intact, their eyes wide open and glinting as if they had been frozen in time. There were about 30 men, standing shoulder to shoulder, hands bound or clasped. The pit was not deep, just half a meter above their heads. I believe they were buried alive, Ivan continued. They must have been herded into the pit and guarded overnight to stop them from escaping, succumbing to the piercing cold. We did not see any blood or gunshot wounds. They alerted the police in a village 60 kilometers away. By evening, a local officer arrived, showing no emotion as he jotted down notes for the report. He explained matter-of-factly that pits like this were common in the area, with no documents on the bodies. There was no point in pursuing an investigation. Then he left. Ivan proposed covering the pit with soil. The crew complied, creating a small mound and placing a wooden cross nearby. Although the incident seemed devoid of mysticism, Ivan admitted that there was something unusual about the site. It's not surprising the bodies were preserved. The permafrost keeps even mammoths intact. But the pit, located in a lowland, had not flooded. No wild animals or scavengers touched the corpses, and nothing grew near it. By comparison, we found a World War II airplane in the taiga the same year, and trees had grown right through it. But here, bare earth. It was as if the pit had been dug only yesterday, and yet, it all happened in the 1930s. P.S. This story struck a personal chord with me. In the 1930s, my great-uncle Alexander vanished into the Soviet prison camps. He was arrested without the right to correspondence and sent near Chita. We never heard from him again. Those taken under such circumstances rarely returned. The horrors they endured and the terrible fates that awaited them remain unfathomable.